All right, everybody. So now that we have, taken a really good look at all these different ways that we can add sort of, slight amounts of dissonance to our musical texture by adding notes that are not in the chords, we want to turn our attention to the most common way to add a little bit of interest to our harmonies by actually adding more notes to the chords that we're actually using. So these are very much chord tones, not non-harmonic tones. And what we're really looking at here is a very, very, very common technique. It's even a little bit much to call it a technique, really, because of how common it is. And we're going to look at seventh chords. So we're going to start off by just sort of talking about what a seventh chord is, why a seventh chord is, how it sort of contributes. And then in this video, we're going to look at the ways that we can add seventh chords to major triads and minor triads. So that's what we're going to do. Let's get in there and explore the wonderful world of seventh chords. All right, here we go. So to just sort of remind ourselves, because it's important to have these details really clearly in mind, with triads, we're talking about three-note chords that are built in thirds, right? So it's not the case that any three notes together are a triad, or even something like this, something that's a little bit more sort of, less clashy than that. It's not a triad if it isn't constructed in thirds, right? And that's really an important element here. And we know that we care so much about that thirds construction that we talk really specifically about the different members of each chord. We've got the root, the third, and the fifth. Of course, the root brings sort of definition to it. The root is sort of the guiding point where everything else relates back to that. The third is there for color, right? So differentiating between major and minor is all from that third. And the fifth is there for stability in these chords, or for instability in that chord, or here's another unstable fifth. Right, we can sort of hear how these chords are definitely not as sort of grounded. So each member of the chord has a very, very specific purpose and function, and that's critical. And we're going to see that same idea persists when we start adding sevenths to these chords. So just to reiterate, we had these four different types of triads. We had augmented, we had major, we had minor, and we had diminished. I would strongly recommend, number one, if you're not feeling super, super comfortable with quickly being able to build all of these triads and knowing what kind of third they each have or what kind of fifth they each have, you really want to take some time to review on that, because, of course, adding an extra note doesn't help. So that's one thing to say. The other thing that I really want to say here is that you really, really, really want to get to a place where you can think of the triad as a unit, right? So when we're looking here, we're seeing that there are these individual intervallic relationships. So major and minor triads consist of a perfect fifth on the outside, right? And then on the inside, there's a major third and a minor third. The order changes between a minor triad, where the minor third's on the bottom, major third's on top, and a major triad where the major third is on bottom and the minor third is on top. So we've got these sort of internal relationships, but what we're going to see when we add a seventh is that for us to really be able to make that adjustment super quickly and easily, we want to be able to think of the triad itself as a unit. And so while it's important to know these internal intervallic relationships, it's it's a lot already to keep track of with just a triad, right? Keeping track of, okay, a minor triad is a minor third on the bottom, is a major, that's a lot of information to really have to focus on. And so having it sort of understood as a unit, I think of it in some ways as when we're speaking or when we're thinking or when we're listening to someone talk, we're hearing the words as a unit. Now, it's important for us, of course, to know how to spell the individual words, but we're not having to process each individual letter as it comes by. And that's the same idea we're looking at here. Obviously, we want to know how to spell these triads, and we want to know what intervals make up their component parts, but we don't want to be stuck on it and need that for our understanding. And that's going to be really important because it's the most effective in adding a seventh to not think only in terms of the relationships of the thirds, to not think, okay, I've got this kind of third, then I stack this kind of third, then I stack this, I call that kind of the snowman approach, just stacking things on top of one another. We want to instead think of the triad as one unit of our seventh chord, and the seventh, that one single note that we're going to add, as its own piece of the puzzle. That's just sort of setting the stage there for the conceptual approach that I would recommend. Let's look at really what happens when we start extending these triads, and then we'll look at some specific seventh chords. So really, like I've been saying, we are going to, in essence, just be extending these triads by stacking more thirds on top, or stacking another third on top. You can sort of go really far if you want to in this. Root third fifth is our triad. What we're looking at here today is adding a seventh, but ninths, 11ths, 13ths, it just kind of keeps on going. So if we look at a chord like this, that's beautiful, right? That's such a shimmery, wonderful chord, and it contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 notes, right? So that has more distinct pitches in it than a major scale does on its own. But when we hear that, it really doesn't sound terribly clashy, right? And it's because when we stack these notes in thirds, there's a real distinct power in that arrangement. It helps to clarify the color of what's going on, right? And it helps things to stay nice and balanced so that we can continue to add thirds on top. Now, in a chord like this one that we're looking at here, you can probably tell that by the time we get up to the upper extensions here, the upper notes in this chord, those are really not doing much in terms of function, right? They're just kind of there for that shimmery, beautiful, colorful, I don't even know what to call it. I'm just going to say color, that colorful color. You like that? But there is one of these notes that we've added that still has a significant influence on the functional properties of the chord. And remember, when we talk about function in music, we're really talking about the directionality. Where does this chord want to lead towards? Where does it want to go? What's it going to sort of make a contextual sense surrounded by? And of course, the note that we're talking about here is the seventh of the chord. Even in a chord like this, where we've got, if you sort of look at this, on the bottom we've got a C natural, on the top we've got a C sharp, a little over 2 octaves apart. There's still a note in the middle of this chord which is doing a lot of functional work in defining the role of this chord. And it's kind of amazing that there can be that influence of one note, no matter how many thirds we stack on top. The seventh maintains its functional drive. So let's talk seventh chords here, right? So now instead of triads, right, we've just got a 4-note chord that's built in thirds. And we are going to see that there are these different uses of seventh chords. Some are really more clearly pointed towards color. Some are pointed more functionally, that sort of tonal structure discussion. Triads, obviously, there's only 3 notes, but we had 3 notes and we came up with 4 different triads, right? Major, minor, augmented, diminished. By adding another note to the mix, we do sort of open up a bit of a wider door in terms of how many combinations of thirds we can have. And there are many, many different types of seventh chords. There are 5 that tend to be the most common, and really these 5 are those that occur naturally in major and minor scales. So that's sort of what we use as our sort of most foundational understanding, is that there are some chords that appear naturally. I sort of sometimes say they appear in the wild. So we're going to mostly look at those 5, but we are also going to talk about the 2 most likely additions, the most common additions that I think are really worth knowing about. And today, like I said, in this video, we're going to just look at the seventh chords that are built on major and minor, major and minor. And actually, I think what we're going to do is we're going to stop now, and I'm going to add in another video, we're going to talk about major and minor. So really, the way we want to think about this is we're just adding sevenths to normal triads, right? We know our triads. We know how they work. We know, major, minor, augmented, diminished. We're just taking those as a starting unit on their own, and we're just going to add one more note on top as a seventh. So check into the next video where we're going to look at what we can do with major triads and minor triads adding sevenths.